My name is Adam Ruben. I'm a molecular biologist at a small biotech company in Rockville, Maryland. And the title of my talk is I'm a professor, you're a professor, he's a professor, she's a professor. Wouldn't you like to be a professor too? The death grip of academic science. Because scientists, if we do anything, it's making titles that are way too long. You may have seen me on Outrageous Acts of Science on the Science Channel and doing other things that don't relate to academic science. I will now explain why. So this is a slide that my advisor in grad school used to put up at the beginning of every talk. We had a lab that was largely focused on HIV, and he wanted to show the number of people in every continent or region that were affected by HIV/AIDS. It makes sense, it's a good intro slide. But one day, a different professor in the department got up and gave a parody slide as his first slide, showing the number of people affected by ERA-C. It's the protein that he studied. Bacteria use it to metabolize a certain sugar. And his point was that no one cares about this thing except the 5 people in his lab. And sitting in the audience, I knew one thing. I did not want to be in academia anymore. I hated the concept of everybody cheering because your work is irrelevant. And the problem is, in academia, academic scientists are currently training all of their students to become academic scientists. This is how academic science used to be. You go to college, after college you go to grad school for 3 to 5 years, you might do a postdoctoral fellowship, which is like an optional little postgraduate school thing, and then you become an assistant professor, as David Hyde Pierce did. However, now all of that has changed. Everything in red on this slide is different from the previous slide. Grad school is more like 6 years, 7 years, 8 years. A postdoc is like another PhD itself, and sometimes you can do a second postdoc and you might not become an assistant professor. You read in the papers, and we all know that we need more scientists, right? You open any paper and it says, we need more students in STEM. We have to find a way to keep students interested in science, technology, engineering, math, medicine, all of these things. However, we all know that we need far fewer scientists, because you open any paper and you see them talking about how there are no jobs for all these scientists, and there are way too many scientists, and what are we going to do with this oversupply of scientists? The fact is, we don't know what the heck we need. We don't know what's going on. We either have too many scientists or too few scientists. It can't be both. But the fact is, in a way, it is both, and I'll explain what that means. So, excuse me. So the problem is, take a look at this graph. This graph shows you the average age of your first grant. So in other words, the time you become a professor for the first time. And in the last 35 years, it's gone steadily from age 36 or so up to 42 or so. And that continues to increase. Where are people during those 6 years? They're in a postdoc. A postdoc is this strange academic purgatory. It's like a circling pattern. And the number of postdocs in the United States has tripled in the past 30 years. And these people are just there doing stuff in the lab, and the problem is they don't even know how many postdocs we have. A few years ago, they discovered 10% increase in postdocs, not because there are more postdocs, but because they found them under a rock. This is true. Universities are not even recording these people. Now, I don't want you to read everything on this slide, although it's a fascinating graphic that I found on the web, other than to say that it's very complicated to figure out where scientists and people interested in science go, where they end up in their careers. And I'm even going to use one of my 20 slides to show you the same one again with circles to point out some important things. 9,000 will receive PhDs in a year, of which 70% will go on to a postdoc. And of those postdocs, only 15% will find a tenure-track academic job, which is a problem because 56% of them expect they're going to get a tenure-track academic job, which means 41% of all postdocs are going to be massively disappointed. That's the problem. So here we have this situation where a lot of people are training in science and going into, they're 35, 36, 40 years old, still in the training phase to someday do something else, which is fine if that's what they want to do. But instead, you get this situation where a lot of people are just massively disappointed when they get to the end. Why are we losing academic jobs? Well, part of it's funding. This is the percentage of grants that NIH actually gives money to, and the amount of money available has shrunk from 30% to 15% of grants funded since 2000. So instead, we present people with what we call alternative science careers. And there are even blogs saying, here are 10 things you could do. But the problem is we're presenting them as alternative, as, well, just in case you don't quite succeed, you could do those. Because academic scientists tell people, hey, you have 2 choices. You could be an academic scientist like me, or you could be a failure. The choice is yours. What we ought to do is tell people of all the other choices available and not make it sound like they are failures. Just because you don't become a professor, it doesn't mean you didn't make it. It means you saw something else along the way that was equally interesting. All these things I just happen to come up with here, some of them involve science very heavily, some don't. They're all fine to do. So the way it ought to be is you go through college, you go through grad school, and afterwards you are presented with this myriad of choices, any of which is completely valid, any of which you could do, and you don't have to be stuck giving the same talk about era C and how no one cares about it. Thank you.